Hey, welcome back everyone. Rob here from Ram Studio Comics, and in today's video we're going to talk about rendering techniques and a few practice activities you can use to improve your skills. So with that, let's jump on in and get started. So there you go, technical pencil, HB lead 0.5. Actually I'm going to switch down to a 0.3. I got to get some more because I only got 0.5s right now, but I find myself wanting to detail more. Anyway, so this is an exercise that I recommend you doing if you're trying to get better at rendering. Now obviously you can just do it as you're creating comic art, but one that I do a lot is I will sketch out some basic primitive shapes, okay? And I know this seems boring to a lot of you, like, oh, I don't want to sit around drawing circles and cubes and triangles and whatever, but this translates into everything else that you will do, so it's important. Basically just draw a perfect circle like that one, you know, semi-perfect, semi-circle. Just try to do it as best you can, but then think about your light source. So one of the things I do is I'll draw a horizon line, and you know, if you know how perspective works, you can draw a line up to where you're, you know, so like say this is a vanishing point, you'd go up from your vanishing point, or not really, it doesn't have to be the same as your vanishing point. It just needs to come up from the horizon line and establish where your light is in the scene. And what happens is it works just like perspective. So you can draw perspective lines out and you can find a shape. And this just helps you think about, you know, keep your light source in mind as you shade. So obviously with anatomy and a body, it's a lot more complex. But it's the same fundamental rules. So what happens here is if the light is, you know, on the opposite side of the sphere, it's going to be a sphere, it's a circle right now obviously, then we're going to get more of a light source or a shadow like this. Once the light source rotates around, orbits around, right, we're thinking like planets here, and it gets on this side, you know, passes a certain point, then this shadow changes to something like this, right? So again, this is just trying to keep the light source in mind. Let me go ahead and erase these lines back, and we'll do some shading and some rendering here, because it kind of starts there. You have to think about perspective and your light source, and you know, position of the light in correspondence to whatever it is you're shading. And that might be possibly, if you're shading and you're getting adverse results, maybe you're not thinking about that enough going into it. You know, it's real easy to just say, well, I just want to put a shadow, you know, wherever, right here, and I'm just going to shade up from there, and that's good enough for me. And that's fine too, but you just want to try to envision this stuff as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is throw in this shadow here and get to rendering, because that's the purpose of this video, right? You guys are probably like, why is it taking so long to get to the rendering? Because you have to think about it. So now what I want to do is also, as I go to render, I don't just start drawing lines and wherever they go. I think of an imaginary ending point for my next level of shading. So in this case, I'm going to draw that in. And I don't ever really draw it in, but I'm doing that for you, the viewer. Let me see if I can tighten up on this just a little bit. Okay. And so now what I might do is I might bring these lines this way and then have them get thinner as they meet that point. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. Let me try to get my hand out of the way as much as possible. So I'm feathering that line, I'm hitting it multiple times, and then I'm getting it thinner, almost like it's dissipating or fading off. Now the thing is, one of the things that is probably the most significant and whether or not your shading looks good is if you have this nice tight line work. Like generally, the tighter the line work is, the better it's going to look, because you're really trying to convey a transition of dark to light. Well, if you have these separated, you know, if you're drawing lines that are, make sure I'm on the camera, if you're drawing lines like this, you know, there's a pretty big difference what this looks like compared to this, right? So it's tapering the lines, but it's also the distance and the separation from one line to the next. And that's the thing I think takes a lot of practice. Now the other thing is I could probably be curving these a lot more. Now I do better when I rotate the page, but I don't want to do that because I want this to be as visual for you as possible, discerning. I want you to be able to see it. If I start rotating my page and get my hand in the way, you're probably not going to be able to see what I'm doing. Now I'm also kind of shying up on these lines. I'm making them shorter, but I'm still keeping them pretty tight together in succession. But yeah, just keep that in mind. If you need a little bit more control, then you're going to probably be rotating the page. I know I do. I pull down and towards myself better. But notice my hand's not moving. Well, my hand's moving, but it's pivoting off my wrist there. It's staying stationary, and I'm simply moving my fingers back and forth. That's important because I can sense a lot more control when I do it that way. So for my tighter rendering, it's very much based upon me planting my hand and just going back and forth. So if this is a larger sphere and I have to start moving my, from my elbow basically, I can still do it, but I'm probably not going to get this level of control. It's just going to vary up. Like I might have to change the speed in which I do it, and I might have to slowly feather these shapes little by little. I might even have to soft erase and redraw it, things like that. But generally when I'm working off the heel of my hand, I don't know if that's the proper way to say it, but we'll just say the heel of my hand, I got a pretty fair amount of control. Now keep in mind too, if I didn't place this line, I probably wouldn't have it that straight as far as the way this transition's going. But so that's another thing to think about. If you want really precise cross-hatching and rendering, then you might give yourself more reference lines. Just little things like that. So it's a lot about the thought process. Now, others will say, "Well, I just can't get that kind of control. I can't draw my lines that clean." I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And it's not like my lines came out clean the first couple years I was drawing. So what happens is that you do this for so long, you learn control. You learn different techniques, like where to place your hand and how to pivot and how to create with less speed, like slow down at certain times and focus. Shut the distractions off too. That's another big part of it. So let's say you guys know what I'm talking about. Your cell phones, your tablets, all your newfangled devices, just turn them off. But yeah, so like. We got that going there, and now if we want to crosshatch this, obviously we can just come back at a different angle. You can make them different thicknesses of lines. You can keep them the same. I think that the big part that I look for when doing this is the pattern that I generate. So for instance, when you crosshatch, hopefully my hand's not blocking this, forgive me. When you crosshatch, you get this like little diamond pattern. So I keep an eye on that pattern, those little diamonds that I'm creating, because that ultimately will show me if I'm, doing what I'm trying to do, I guess. But I guess that's one part of it. I also focus on the taper of the lines, but for right now, I think the diamond shapes are easier to see as I do this. So I'm probably going at about a 45-degree angle, something like that. I'm still feathering the lines. I'm still going for a taper. And it's giving me a little bit darker transition on this lower part of the sphere. And then I'm actually fading it off and making them shorter right here, just so I can kind of explain what's going on there. Now another thing that's kind of neat is you can go back into this. This electric eraser works really well for this too. And you can create some negative lines. I like doing this in a lot of my shading. Now you're going to see this more in the inking, but I just want to show you that there's a couple ways to kind of look at this. You can really practice some different things. I think an electric eraser would work better there, but I just want to show you there's lots of different ways to implement the shading. Now, the big part about rendering too is realizing that you can be pretty messy, I'm trying to be pretty clean here, but there's lots of styles and lots of reasons why you want to be messy as well. I think of it in terms of contrast. So for instance, I don't want to put this type of shading over my entire illustration. It'll make it boring, it'll flatten it out, Well, maybe I won't flatten it out, but it'll just make it blah, uninteresting. You know, just so to me, what I want to do, like for instance, if I want to shade this background to separate the sphere from I'll call this area the atmosphere, you know, just the background, then I'll try some different lines back here. Now these ones I'm purposely not tapering, and I'm just drawing them quickly in succession, and I might still crosshatch them. And I should be using a rider under my hand because I'm smearing through my work there. And then maybe even another level of shading this way. And then maybe I even fade it off and separate them as they come up. So it's another way to, you know, kind of create a gradient this way. Because I'm starting tighter in succession, I'm fading them off. But notice I didn't do any tapering right there. So it's different than what we've created here. The other thing that you're going to use is line weight. You're gonna, you know, maybe put a nice heavy line right here, maybe a thinner line up here, maybe even erase some bits of the line up here. So that's going to help you to create the idea of light source. And obviously this is pretty messy, but you might just go back and have like a broken up line there, and as it comes around here it gets heavier and then it meets into the shadow. So lots of different ways to try to convey light and dark and you know, form basically. So now the other thing is, let's try a shadow under it. So cast, or what is a cast or drop shadow? Say a cast shadow. Let me get rid of these other lines here. My trusty kneaded eraser. That's pretty dirty. Probably need another one. All right, so get rid of that. And so same thing here, I'm going to try another shading coming out this way, rendering, but now what I'm going to do is try to vary it up. So I'm going to use tapered lines that start pretty heavy and then thin out. And you probably say, well, you just did tapered lines on the sphere, but they're going to be different tapered lines. There's just lots and lots of ways you can create these lines. Need some more lead here. So for instance, I could probably even just go with that. I could say, well, you know, I've got some thick to thin lines here that are fading off. That's what I wanted, the gradation. And I'll tell you what, I'll even do one more thing. I'll add these thin lines that start off tight in succession and then fade out. Okay, so now you could tell that this reads differently than that, even if ever so slightly, but it reads differently. And so now, let's see, I'm going to put some of these straight lines over here. So again, no taper, a little bit of cross hatching. And what was the other way I did? Horizontal. And then fade out. So trying to keep some continuity from side to side, but you can tell that side looks a bit different than over there. But again, we're establishing some different variation in the line work, some gradation, some rounded forms. So this type of rendering practice is really good. Now, let's do a different example. Okay, so let's go ahead and establish just a basic sketch of something. So I'm picturing like maybe some fabric that is kind of folded up, bunched up, kind of going over the edge of something. So this is kind of the same idea you might use for a cape or cloth, clothing. You get these kind of reverse folds. Let's say something like this. So what I want to do here is try to illustrate, hope I'm on canvas here on screen, is illustrate these shapes, but not draw every line. So I started with the lines, but then I'm going to fill in some shadow. I have another couple of these pockets. These always kind of look cool. So they're like these U shapes and something like that. And then you're going to get a shadow to one side of these kind of hills, I'll just call them. Okay, something like that. So that just gives us a starting point. And so now what we can do is just render this out a little bit more. So even just these tiny little lines coming off the side help to push this these shapes around, push them up. So if I want to recess this area, maybe some lines going down this way, push it up, lines going up this way. So if you want to shade something back, cover it with the shadow or some tighter succession of lines. And if you want to push something up or transition it, you come from the shadow and kind of point up. Or, you know, away from the shadow. You're basically just making a gradation. Cross-hatching over here. And we can get in here with our little tiny eraser and kind of clean this up a little bit. And notice too, I'm trying to get a lot of those lines out of there. I'm keeping some for the, well, I guess these aren't even lines when they have a shadow to the one side. It actually becomes more of a shadow or a heavier line weight. But through the middle, I got rid of a lot of those lines because I want to show you that it still reads just based upon the shadow. Now, a book I really recommend for kind of wrapping your head around this way of thinking is Burne Hogarth's, I think it's Dynamic Light and Shade or Dynamic Light and Shadow. I'll link to it in the description, but amazing stuff. And one of the things that I like most about what he does is he teaches you how to look at shapes and silhouettes and utilize those to your advantage because you can do a lot with silhouettes. And one of the things he does is he'll draw these foliage scenes. He worked on Tarzan and some beautiful, beautiful stuff. So he'll do these like, let's see if I can kind of emulate what I'm talking about or what he explains. So you might have all this foliage where you have like, you know, some leaves, some branches that, you know, he always did these beautiful like swirling branches, very organic looking stuff. But he would do these series of silhouettes that overlapped, and so he'd have these solid silhouettes, like maybe this is the base of a tree, and then off in the distance over here he might have another series of silhouettes that conveyed, you know, some land off in the distance, maybe a, you know, tiger or something walking. I'm not going to draw that because I can't draw tigers, but he would do these series of silhouettes that kind of painted this whole picture, and I mean in full detail. It's really amazing. So you also want to incorporate a lot of that way of thinking into your scenes as well. Like, don't discount the power of the silhouette and the shadow, because if your rendering's not working, it's probably because the shadows aren't right. You know, the shadows aren't as predominant as they could be, and that's something I fight with, and I've got to do better. So I'm in that situation with you if you're there. So I'll make sure the link's in the description box below, and I really do recommend you check out his books. He was a phenomenal art instructor, and I learned immensely from them. It's one of the things that when people always say, what books have you read that really helped transform your work? I always reference Burne Hogarth. When I picked up his books years ago, I felt like they really helped me explore new ideas and really delve into my work more confidently than I ever had before. So I love his work, really recommend it. And back to this little doodle. So notice too that I'm cross-hatching now some of this just to create a kind of a horizon fade, but really let these silhouettes do most of the work. I just wanted to show you could shade this as well. You know, you see I'm being real messy with it too. It's not pretty, but it should still read, it should still work. You see we've got this silhouette up here, and we could even break this silhouette off into cross-hatching up here. You know, there's just so many different ways you can really make this work, but the main thing is that you doodle. Like, you really need to sit around and fill up pages of rendering and scribbles like this, so that when you go to do your illustrations, this stuff it's muscle memory too. It's like this stuff just kind of bounces back, and you're like, oh, I remember when I was shading this one thing and it looked good. Let me try that again. But yeah, so hopefully this gives you some ideas. I just wanted to share some more traditional art videos, and like I said, some on rendering. Let me know what you think of this video so I can make more for you, and I can cover other topics as we press forward. But there you go, practice these. I know sometimes it can seem boring to do this stuff, but it's really beneficial for you. It's really worth the time and the effort. So as always, good luck with your art, and I will talk to you soon. Keep drawing, keep having fun, and bye for now.